Michael Cohen pleading guilty in a Manhattan federal court to lying to Congress. The former personal attorney to the president admitted he made false statements to lawmakers about a plan to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. Cohen's plea, his second in the past 4 months, comes as part of a new deal with special counsel Robert Mueller and the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. President Trump went after Cohen before leaving for the G20.
He was convicted of various things unrelated to us. He was given a fairly long jail sentence, and he's a weak person. And by being weak, unlike other people that you watch, he's a weak person, and what he's trying to do is get a reduced sentence. So he's lying about a project that everybody knew about. I decided ultimately not to do it. There would have been nothing wrong if I did do it.
Meanwhile, we are learning more about the president's written answers to the special counsel as he continues to hammer out an investigation that has hung over his presidency for some 18 months. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge with the news from Washington. Catherine?
Well, thank you, Harrison. Good afternoon. This draft prepared by Cohen's attorneys for Congress in 2017 is at the heart of Cohen's guilty plea this morning about this Moscow real estate proposal that never went through. As Cohen left a New York court this morning, he did not stop to take reporters' questions about the apparent conflict. In the draft for Congress in 2017, Cohen said negotiations over the Trump-Moscow project ended in January of 2016. But he told a New York court today it was, in fact, 5 months later in June of 2016. In the draft, Cohen said the discussion about traveling to Moscow was limited and it was never raised with then-candidate Trump. But Cohen told a New York court the discussions were, in fact, more extensive. On Capitol Hill a short time ago, the chairman and the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, that committee matters because they got the testimony from Cohen in the first place, reacted to the plea.
I'm not going to comment upon the commentary that this individual made before our committee. We've kept that confidential, but obviously Mr. Cohen was one of the witnesses that we've always wanted to have come back, and that need goes up.
I haven't seen the specific indictment or the plea, but this is a reason people shouldn't lie when they're in front of a congressional investigation.
Before the Cohen story broke this morning, the president renewed his criticism of the Robert Mueller probe, tweeting, "When will this illegal Joseph McCarthy-style witch hunt, one that has shattered so many innocent lives, ever end? Or will it just go on forever?" After wasting more than $40 million, it has proven only one thing. There was no collusion with Russia. So ridiculous. And we're also learning today more about the president's written answers to Mueller. They were submitted just within the last couple of weeks. Sources tell Fox News that the president said he did not know about the 2016 Trump Tower meeting in advance, that Roger Stone did not tell him about any contact with WikiLeaks, and that he was also not aware of the RNC platform change regarding the Ukraine. So that's a lot to unpack, but that's where we stand on this very busy news day, Harris.
Before I let you go, because this is something I didn't get to ask you last hour, how do we know all this information? I mean, when you talk about a leak, do we know how?
A leak, sorry, with
just with the questions and the, I mean, are we learning just that in kind of context, or do we actually know what's being asked?
Okay, so we know that the submitted questions from the special counsel dealt with the issues surrounding allegations of Russian collusion. They did not deal with what I'll call obstruction of justice, which would be, some argue, the firing of the FBI Director James Comey. What's happened really in the last 72 hours is that there have been a series of leaks about the substance of the president's written answers to the special counsel. CNN got that story first. We were able to corroborate some of that reporting. And in the last few minutes, I've spoken with a source close to the legal team, and I asked whether the Cohen plea today has any impact on the written responses provided by the president. And I was told that the legal team remains confident with the written answers that were provided. So it doesn't change their calculus at this point.
Oh, thank you for digging deeper on that. Catherine
You're
Herridge
welcome.
And spelling it out for us. Good to see you.
Sure.
Let's bring in now Republican Lee Zeldin of New York. I kind of felt like you deposing her there. The congressman sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, maybe even asking some of the questions that you might ask, Congressman. Thank you for being with me. What does this tell us about the Mueller investigation?
Well, for one, the president, who has personal knowledge that he didn't do anything wrong, he continues to cooperate. He's answering questions. A lot of documents have been provided. This investigation appears to be going well beyond, with this ever-expanding scope. That is a lot further than the purpose for appointing the special counsel in the first place. The president is ready for this investigation to end, but what's more important than that is our country is ready for it to end. So the Mueller investigation hopefully is one that will be winding down soon, because it really is improper for there to be an investigation like this throughout the entire time that President Trump is in office. I, as a member of Congress, I'm serving this is the end of my 4th year now. I'm not aware of any evidence whatsoever that the president had colluded with the Russians. So until we come in contact with any information whatsoever, the justification for not only continuing this investigation, but also expanding the probe, like what we're seeing, well beyond of why it was created in the first place. We have a lot of members of Congress who have a problem with that too.
All right, Michael Cohen, were you surprised at all about the entry of a guilty plea, if you will, that he put in this morning, lying to Congress?
Well, what strikes me about it is that Mueller's star witness has now admitted to being a liar criminally. And I'm a former prosecutor, and looking for facts and elements of a crime, I see so much that is missing about what gets alleged maybe in the news, or those who want to take down the president, who are desperate, who are praying to take down the president and his family. There's so much that is missing here, and now you have a star witness who has less credibility than he did yesterday, and an investigation that has less credibility than it did yesterday. And it seems like one indictment and guilty plea after another of what we're seeing it is getting away from the heart of why this special counsel was created in the first place, and that was for there to be accountability and transparency with regards to whether or not the Russians interfered with the 2016 election, and so much of the crimes that get pursued are completely unrelated to the Trump campaign, and a lot of what is taking down these individuals, like what we're seeing today with Michael Cohen, is with regards to lying. And by the way, regardless of whether it's this case or any other case, and you just had Senator Kennedy share his thoughts in the last segment, is whether you're talking to Congress, you're talking to the Department of Justice, it's really important to be honest, because if you lie, you're going to get in trouble for it.
Yeah, I spoke with Senator Kennedy last night on the story, and that's exactly what he was saying. Real quickly before I let you go, how do you make a deal with what you call a criminal liar? I mean, he's striking yet another deal. And is it significant that he's doing it in your state of New York or in any state?
Well, with regards to that piece, geography and jurisdiction, is that you don't need a special counsel to be going after so much of what it appears Bob Mueller is looking into now. The Department of Justice can handle that on its own. And also, why, with Jeff Sessions, he's left the Department of Justice. The reason why this was created really started with, it stemmed from a recusal made by Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General. So now let's get back to normalcy within the Justice Department. Let's have an Attorney General who's in charge of the DOJ, because to your point on jurisdiction and geography, and this happening in New York, this really can be happening all under the normal chain of command of the Department of Justice, as opposed to making the special counsel even bigger than it was before.
Does Michael Cohen lessen the years in prison that he might have to spend by doing this deal making?
Probably. I mean, that's probably the whole motive for doing it in the first place, is to be able to get favorable treatment. And there's a lot that Michael Cohen has gotten in trouble with that's completely unrelated to President Trump. This was Michael Cohen's own actions, and looks like he's cutting a deal to get favorable treatment for himself, even if that might be harming a president of the United States. It might be embarrassing our justice system. It's Michael Cohen doing what's best for Michael Cohen, regardless of the consequences. That's unfortunate.
Yeah. I don't know. I had not heard anybody put it the way you did, criminal liar. How do you trust that person? How do you cut a deal with somebody like that?
No credibility.
Congressman, thank you so very much. Congressman Lee Zeldin of New York. Good to see you.
Thank you, Harris.
Let's go deeper legally now. Tom Dupree, who served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General under President George W. Bush. Tom, always good to have you on the program. I hope you were able to hear or watch my conversation just then with Congressman Zeldin. I want to get your reaction to it.
Yes, absolutely. And look, I think the congressman made a lot of very good points. And Harris says, to your question about how do you cut a deal with a criminal liar, it's a fair point, because if the idea is that at some point, someday, Bob Mueller might call Michael Cohen as a witness or rely on him for testimony or for building a case against the president, that is something that he's going to have to deal with. That this is a guy who you have indicted for making false statements to Congress, and at the same time, you're now holding him up as a model of probity or as someone whose word can be taken at face value. I will say this, though, that this is very common in prosecutorial world, right, is that you cut a deal with someone like Michael Cohen and you get him to admit to lying, but then on the other hand, you say, but we want you to believe the rest of what he's saying. So it's common ground for prosecutors, but it is an interesting twist to all of this.
Yeah, you know, I just kind of harken back to my debate days in college, and whenever anybody tried to posture a win in a debate with a liar's lair, I knew they had lost. Because when you have somebody standing up that doesn't tell the truth, but they're a really good storyteller, yeah, right. I got you on that.
Right, right.
So President Trump says that he has not yet offered his former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, a pardon. It's not off the table. This has been much discussed. And now that we know that Paul Manafort breached his deal, according to Mueller, by lying, or at the very least resisted to adhere to any sort of a narrative, what does that tell us about the pardon status going forward?
Well, this has been just a constantly changing saga, Harris, like from day to day. And I think the latest developments, what they tell me is that Manafort is still doing his best to remain in the good graces of the president and the White House. No doubt, at least with an eye toward a possible pardon down the road. The thing that really jumped out at me from the news developments of the last few days is the fact that Manafort's team has been keeping the president's legal team looped in as to the questions that Mueller has been asking him and the evidence that Mueller has disclosed to Manafort in the course of his questioning Manafort. That, to me, says it is very important from Paul Manafort's perspective to maintain a good relationship with this president, with the White House. And the only explanation I can find for what is a very unusual development is that he wants to at least keep the possibility of a pardon in play.
Tom, is the world just filled with liars when they talk to the FBI? I mean, why does the constant stream seem to be dishonesty? And that's not even really evidence, by the way. That's not like they went to a crime scene and captured some evidence.
Yeah, you know, Harris, it's fascinating. I mean, I suppose it raises deeper questions of human nature, but the thing that always jumps out at me in these types of investigations is so often the thing that catches people is their lies under oath, their lies to prosecutors, their lies to Congress.
Are they just nervous? Can it happen to any of us?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say it could happen to any of us, but I will say that...
It just seems so common.
For anyone who goes and interacts with the Justice Department or Congress, you just have to be so scrupulous and so careful, because that's where things often go awry, is that people will be telling a story and maybe it's an intentional lie, maybe it's just a failure to remember something, maybe it's inadvertent, but the consequences can be so very severe.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get to is that kind of the modus operandi when you're investigating like this, rather than just looking for the sheer evidence if you can't find it. And maybe that's another reason why attorneys would tell the president not to sit down, because this happens so very often.
Yeah, I think that has got to be something that at least is on the mind of the lawyers in the White House, that any time you put the president or, frankly, any client in the position where they're testifying under oath, there is always that danger lurking out there. Obviously, it's one thing if the witness is intentionally lying, but it's quite another thing if, as I said a minute ago, it's an honest failure to recall something or a failure to fully disclose something. You can get in a lot of hot water that way, so you have to be very, very careful and make sure your witness is very well prepared.
One last one to hit you with. Alan Dershowitz, somebody that I'm sure you're familiar with, being the legal guru that you are, so I would imagine maybe you guys even talk to each other as legal experts, recently said that the president should be very worried about what Mueller has. And he didn't say criminally, but he said there's a stack of evidence there, I'm paraphrasing him now, that he should worry about. What is it?
Well, let's see. I mean, the first thing is like only the president knows exactly whether he should be worried, and he has been very firm that he has nothing to worry about. Right. And I think from Dershowitz's perspective, and I think there's some truth to this, that, look, Bob Mueller has been out conducting this investigation for a long time. He has talked to a lot of people, and as we know, he has gotten the cooperation of people who are very close to the president. Now, is there going to be information that is in some sense politically damaging to the president that is going to come out at the end of the day? My guess is probably yes. But for me, at least, the big question is whether it crosses the line to establish some sort of criminal wrongdoing on the part of the president or those close to him. I think that is the big question. Politically damaging, yes. What are the legal consequences? I would say to be determined.
All right. Tom Dupree, thank you very much. See you next time.
Thanks, Harris.
Continuing coverage now of former Trump attorney Michael Cohen's guilty plea with live reaction from lawmakers on both sides of the political aisle. Along with the power panel this hour. Plus, President Trump abruptly canceled his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin while traveling to the G20 summit. Details. Stay close. All right, the story is now developing. In the last few seconds, President Trump abruptly canceled his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin while traveling to the G20 summit to Argentina, pointing to escalating tensions between Russia and Ukraine. Kevin Corke is live in Buenos Aires, Argentina, with the latest. And so now we know the response from Russia. Kevin?
That we do. Just to give you a bit of background there, Harris, the president conferred with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, as well as his national security advisor, also his chief of staff, who is a former general. And the president made it clear and made that decision aboard Air Force One to simply scrub this meeting, at least for the time being. That's what we can tell you. I can always tell you this, too. We kind of felt like coming into this summit that this was certainly a possibility, given Russia's aggressive behavior over and with respect to Ukraine. First, let me take you to Twitter and share just a bit what the president had to say about this. Of course, following that decision made aboard Air Force One, it said this on Twitter: based on the fact that the ships and sailors have not been returned to Ukraine from Russia, I've decided it would be best for all parties concerned to cancel my previously scheduled meeting in Argentina with President Vladimir Putin. I look forward to a meaningful summit again as soon as this situation is resolved. As you see there, he leaves open the window just a bit there, Harris. It could still happen. The Kremlin's recent attack and the seizure of those Ukrainian vessels in the Sea of Azov obviously prompted leaders in Ukraine to ask for help from NATO. And that sort of made it easy for the president to simply say, I'm not going to do this right now. Now, while I have you, you mentioned, very important, that we have heard from the Russians. They say this: so far we have only seen the tweet and the media on Trump canceling the meeting. We have no official information. They go on to say, if this is so, we will have a couple of additional hours talking about President Putin that he can have for useful meetings on the sidelines of the summit. There is the very latest that we received there from the Russians. Harris?
Just put my reading glasses on to read it, too, because that was the part that kind of stuck out to me. That's that kind of shade wrapped in diplomacy, if you will. We'll just make better use of our time if that's the case. So we will wait to see the official word received. Exactly. Kevin Corke, thank you very much. Let's bring in now Republican Senator Ron Johnson, chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee. Great to see you today. Thank you for being on the program. I first want to just get your reaction to the idea that there was a go back and forth, if you will, over a meeting with President Putin, but what's happening with Ukraine obviously having an effect on that.
Well, hello, Harris. Listen, I'm not going to second guess the president. We are hoping that they are pressing, the administration is pressing the Putin regime behind the scenes. We have a resolution. I have close to 50 Senate co-sponsors right now that condemns the action, that calls for the immediate return and release of the prisoners and the vessels, is going to affirm Secretary Pompeo's declaration that we will never recognize the attempted annexation of Crimea, and certainly that we reaffirm our support for the Ukrainian people, its government, and its territorial integrity. So I think we need, across the board, all of our allies across government, a very strong and resolute response. I would love to see freedom of navigation operations, multinational, going through the Kerch Strait and into the Sea of Azov. We cannot tolerate this type of aggressive and provocative behavior by Vladimir Putin.
Before we move on from the Ukraine situation, what do you want to see us do next?
Well, again, I would love to see freedom of navigation operations, multinational. We have to make sure that Vladimir Putin realizes he cannot harass not Ukrainian shipping and not multinational shipping through the Kerch Strait and the Sea of Azov. It's just simply unacceptable. But I also think that we've got to beef up exercises, maybe forward troop deployments into the Baltic states, into Eastern Europe. We must meet this kind of provocative and aggressive behavior with strength and resolve.
That's what I was getting at. Are we posturing now to have more of a visible movement there, which always is a stressor. It always escalates things, but I wondered if that was your view, and you've answered it. Let's move on. About this time yesterday, you were coming out of that Senate intel briefing with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on the Khashoggi columnist killing and learning so much more about that. There was an absence there of the CIA Director, Gina Haspel. Has that been dealt with any bit today?
Not that I'm aware of. I've asked for a briefing from the CIA to figure out how they came to their conclusion, but I thought Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Mattis were quite convincing. They say there's no smoking gun. Nobody condemns the horrific murder. But the fact of the matter is the most malign force in the Middle East is Iran. I happen to believe America is a positive force, particularly our military. And as Secretary Mattis said, you can't really prove a negative, but our influence, I believe, has probably saved lives. And I think it's only American influence that can bring the rebel Houthis to the negotiating table to actually settle this and end the bloodshed. So in a world of kind of a mean, nasty, ugly world, we have to engage in real politics, and I think we have to continue to engage the Saudis as a counter to Iran and can be able to continue to exert influence over the Saudis in order to get a better resolution.
All right, you used the word condemn. No one condemns. So I'm just going to think you meant condones, and we'll move on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, we certainly condemn that action.
This is what we do.
Thanks
I'm a journalist. I'm listening very closely. What should happen with Saudi Arabia's crown prince in terms of a meeting with our own government, our own president? Should that happen?
Well, first of all, the situation between the United States diplomatically and Saudi Arabia has changed. That horrific murder has just changed things. I'm not exactly sure what is the absolute best course of action. But again, you have to understand what the situation in the region is, the counter that Saudi Arabia does represent to Iran's malign influence. Let's face it, Iran wants to set up a Yemen form of Hezbollah, which would be not only a danger to Saudi Arabia, but also to Israel. We have Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. They are continuing to plot bomb attacks against the West. We have a smaller ISIS contingent now in Yemen as well. So we have real security interests in Yemen and in that conflict.
Well, you mentioned the AQIAP in the peninsula there. It's my understanding that we would do a set-aside. We're going to continue to work on that no matter what situation happens between us and Saudi Arabia. What's happening the latest now with the Senate's Yemen vote? What do you think that will look like, and what does it entail?
I mean, nobody can predict the outcome on that. We successfully moved on to the resolution. There's a possibility for a vote-a-rama where you can apply any non-germane amendment to it, so nobody knows where that's going to go. I'm sure leadership is working with the resolution's authors to see if we can come to a conclusion on this thing. Listen, I think every senator wants to send a very strong signal to Saudi Arabia. This is completely unacceptable behavior. But again, you have to understand the reality of the situation and deal with that reality.
Yeah, Yemen. Potentially a huge humanitarian crisis. I know it's a focus of yours on the Hill. Senator Johnson, thank you very much. Great to have your time.
Have a good day.
You too. Nancy Pelosi is celebrating after Democrats endorsed her for House Speaker yesterday. But should she be confident when it comes time for the January floor vote, given that 32 of her colleagues now voted against her? Now, remember, she said, well, a few of you can vote against me. 32 was not that number. One of Pelosi's supporters in Congress will join me next.
It was so inspiring to hear my colleagues place my name in nomination once again for Speaker of the House.
If you are considering silver for your savings and retirement accounts, here is an amazing offer from Lear Capital.
Well, Nancy Pelosi just cleared a critical obstacle in her bid for House Speaker. Democrats formally endorsed the current minority leader yesterday in a caucus vote. But 32 of her colleagues voted against her, signaling trouble ahead of the all-important floor vote in January. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill. So 32 was not the droid she was looking for. It needed to be fewer votes no on that for her.
Absolutely right, Harris. Good afternoon to you. Nancy Pelosi has taken a critical step, but clearly has some more work to do. Pelosi met with three of the principal critics of her, people who want new leadership. They're Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, Tim Ryan of Ohio, and Kathleen Rice of New York. An aide familiar says Pelosi listened closely to the trio's concerns. Moulton said after the meeting, quote, "Our request was and has always been simple. Produce a meaningful plan for a leadership transition, as you promised in the summer, to allow a new generation of leadership to step forward." Rice spoke with reporters about what they want.
This is all about moving on to the next generation of leadership, and we need to get there. We need to get there. That's what the voters want. They're sick and tired of the same kind of establishment politics going on with all the, getting people, giving them committeeships and all these kind of things. That is the reason why people have a lack of faith in what we do here in Washington.
But a member of the new Democratic leadership team says Pelosi should not announce a departure date.
She is not going to lame duck herself, particularly because we're dealing with the Trump administration, we're dealing with Mitch McConnell and the boys in the Senate, and we're dealing with some of Trump's friendly co-conspirators in the House of Representatives. Why in the world would she or anyone lame duck themselves?
But other Democrats say you cannot expect ambitious people to wait around.
I value the seniority system, but I also respect the fact that we have elected some incredible people who have unbelievable talent and who are the future of our party. And we need to highlight them. And I think that's what Leader Pelosi is dedicated to, and that's certainly what I want to see happen.
Some Democrats note the top House Democratic leadership team has been the same for 11 years. They don't want to wait much longer for some signs of change. Harris?
Wow. What a chasm. Should you move on and have change or not? It seems like a continuing theme among Democrats. Mike Emanuel, thank you very much. In fact, I'm going to ask one of them to see if that's, in fact, the case. Democrat Congressman John Garamendi of California, who supported Nancy Pelosi yesterday, joins me now. Good to see you. Before we even start, you're running for your own point of leadership, correct?
Well, I'm looking at what they call the policy communications piece of it, and that's part of what I'm doing right now is communicating what the Democratic caucus is all about, where we want to go, our policies all the way down the line. So we'll see. That vote is actually going to be counted while I'm talking to you. Maybe I win, maybe I lose, but I'm going to continue doing what I've been doing, which is speaking out and carrying the message.
Congressman, they're voting on whether or not you get that leadership position and you're on outnumbered overtime? All right. Well, if we see it on the wires, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Tell me what it's like right now, because you heard two different pieces, two lanes, if you will, in your party, and they all have to deal with Nancy Pelosi. Is there no room, regardless of whether you lame duck her now or, put her in a position that she just, got endorsed to, whatever the situation is?
Well,
go
first
ahead.
First of all, Nancy Pelosi is change. Let's consider for a moment that absolutely.
Oh, you're
going
to have to explain to me how Nancy Pelosi has changed.
Well, just hang on, Harris.
All right.
Here you go. Nancy Pelosi has been the leader of us through the good times back in 2008, 9, 10, where there's extraordinary work done from the Affordable Care Act to the Recovery Act to Dodd-Frank to veterans and on and on. And then through the bad times, maintaining the Democratic position on a health care system specifically, where we fought back for 63 times against the Republican Congress on that matter. And ultimately, in the 2018 election, the public said, yeah, we got to have health care. And Nancy led that together with the rest of her team. And she changed the Congress of the United States together with her team. Now, with regard to those people that want to come up and be the next generation, they're actually in the process of being elected. I don't consider myself among those. I'm not looking for climbing up the ladder, but there are others that have already been elected
Give me an
to
example.
leadership positions.
I'm thinking you mean somebody like a Hakeem Jeffries.
Well, Hakeem, certainly, the new chairman of the caucus, Kathleen Rice, not Kathleen Rice, but the vice chairperson, and you go down through the list, Ben Ray Lujan. These are all new people, and they are in line for the next change that will occur. When that'll occur, we don't know, but we do know that for the next 2 years, we cannot have a lame duck. And Pelosi's going to stand strong, and she's going to lead us together with the rest of her leadership team and the committee chairs, which will be taking hold of the various committees on January the 3rd.
I can see that you fully support her. You've got a group called the Problem Solvers of about 9 to 12 people. We have seen some of them switch their stance. Some of them can't. Some of these people who ran on voting against Nancy Pelosi are going to need the space politically to be able to do that. Otherwise, they'll lose their seats the next time around because they'll be proven to be not honest. So she knows she's got to deal with that. But the number 32 is far north of how many people I would think that she's comfortable with voting no.
Well,
Are goodies being given away? I mean, how do you keep these people from not voting no in January?
Well, she needs 17. You had Kathleen Rice on, and Kathleen Rice said that they need new leadership. And I'm saying, Kathleen, go back to the caucus. The new leadership was just elected in the lower positions on the stairs that will bring them eventually to the leadership role. So that's one piece of it. The other piece,
not everybody wants to be
17.
kept in a low role. You know, there are some young people who want to rise.
Well, of course they do. And they are, in fact, doing so. They're seeking positions on the various committees that they want, that they think they have the ability to serve with wisdom and expertise on those committees, and they will seek and they will get those committees. Are those goodies to be handed out? No, that's the process of selecting the very best people to carry out the role on the various committees. And as I've said, there's about 7 new people that will be on the ladder for leadership. So it's all there. We're going to, and Nancy needs 17 of those 32.
We'll see what happens to the balance.
I'll lay you a bet.
All right.
She'll have more than the 17.
I haven't talked with anybody who doesn't think she'll get it. It's just then the question is, how hard is it going to be to govern after that when you have to caucus people, a big group?
Caucus
but I
will
got to
stand
let you go
behind her.
because they're voting on you for policy leadership, and you're on the program. You got to go find out if you made it.
Hey, thanks, Harris.
Congressman Garamendi, thank you. Good luck,
Thank you.
California. Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much. Today's big story, the new guilty plea from the president's former lawyer and confidant, Michael Cohen. What does that mean for the Mueller investigation? Could it be closer now to wrapping up? That's something the president and his team have been predicting all along. Power panel slides in. Stay close.
So very simply, Michael Cohen is lying, and he's trying to get a reduced sentence for things that have nothing to do with me.
Fox top story still developing today. Let's build it now. Michael Cohen pleading guilty to making false statements to Congress about business dealings in Russia. The president ripped into his former attorney, calling him weak and a liar. This now from our power panel. From the Independent Women's Forum, former Republican Congresswoman Nan Hayworth is here. Leslie Marshall, radio host and Democrat strategist, also a Fox News contributor. Good to see you both.
Thank you.
And this story is still coming together as we learn more details about what Michael Cohen agreed to this morning. First reaction.
Well, you know, Michael Cohen, the president spoke pretty freely about it. And of course, you know, we heard Catherine Herridge say that the president's legal team is still confident that whatever Michael Cohen has agreed to tell them does not apparently conflict with anything that the president has said to the Mueller team. So it sounds as though they're not terribly worried about the president's being compromised by this in any way.
Yeah, in terms of those written answers that he gave,
right.
And you know there was still some discussion. The president did not say he would not sit down with Bob Mueller. He said probably not. Does this open the door for that re-ask to happen?
I don't know. You know, and I'm not surprised that this came down because
you're not.
No, because
why not?
Well, because I didn't think that when Cohen pled guilty prior and when he was cutting a deal prior, that was the end of the deals. I mean, he had worked for the president for a very long time. He had 70 hours recently of testimony and Q&A with Mueller and Mueller's team, so I expected more to come out. I'm very curious about the timeline here, so I don't agree with you as to whether or not there's a little bit of nail-biting by the president and his attorneys.
But, you know, still, if the president was, I mean, the president said this morning, he was quite blunt. He said, look, I was doing business, yes, while I was running for president. That in and of itself was not in any way a violation of
There's not
laws.
A problem with him doing business.
Right.
Leading
he said,
up
I didn't know if I was going to win. Basically. So
everybody would say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but my question, I guess, has to be with Michael Cohen. And I've asked legal experts this, and now I want to know from a political end. When you lean your investigation on somebody who is, and we've now heard from Congressman Zeldin, a criminal liar. He's now a criminal liar. Are you leaning on a tent post, or are you about to fall over on a toothpick?
How do I answer that?
I don't know. It's a binary choice.
Either way, you're impaled. It's just a question of how much.
Wow.
Well, I think what happens, too, it's just very simplistic. You know, were you lying then? Are you lying now? Right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. But also, you know, again, to me, it just comes down to that time. Why was there the need to lie about that timeline?
But
with
who knows?
regard to the tower meeting?
And the answer certainly right now would be, well, Michael Cohen may have his own reasons for not having, or, you know, having changed his answers. Michael Cohen's responsible for his own testimony. You know, who knows what that might be.
What should the president do at this point?
Listen to his legal counsel.
Well, he said he's going to do that. But comment or not comment on it?
I think the president is always inclined to defend himself. Certainly, he is so forthright that it's hard to imagine, because he is an intelligent man, it's hard to imagine that he would make public statements that he couldn't somehow legally validate in the setting of the investigation.
Well, you know, and the total picture, and I've seen this kind of with each person we've talked about, Paul Manafort, these people had a role in the president's life, but so much of what's been looked at happened before the campaign.
I don't think that this is a fishing expedition, and I think we're seeing more dots connect. And I think,
like what?
Yeah,
give me an example.
Well, I think if we look at, and we had talked about this on Outnumbered yesterday, if we look at WikiLeaks and Russia and Corsi, and then you factor in Cohen and timeline and tower meeting and business dealings, and you know, different offices being raided for questionable documents. Mueller is not, to me, wasting taxpayer money going on a fishing expedition. Everybody says this is winding down. He needs this to come to a head. And in order to do that, he has to have everything lined up before he makes his final investigation.
I see a bunch of dots that just aren't connecting to the president's disadvantage. I'm just not seeing it.
So I didn't say to his disadvantage.
Yeah.
I said
you
to the truth.
Each other.
To the truth.
And you said not to the president.
Right. Well, there's a truth in there somewhere.
Fascinating. President Trump, with an eye on 2020, taking a look at potential opponents in the presidential election and liking his chances of winning again. Is he right to feel confident? The Power Panel stays.